and I just would like to ask him a couple questions because he's an important primary witness in my account. Brett,
okay.
When I spoke of bismuth as the crystal in the chronovisor, should I, as a non-physicist, have known that?
No, it's not really any element that anyone really would ever pick. It's there's just if it were a fabricated story, there's many other different elements that picked, 120, 119 others. And no, there's really no way that you in your testimony you described a crystalline structure of bismuth, and and that comes up. There's an oscillation or resonance to that you start getting special properties, and that's a natural, like in Egyptian hieroglyphs. There's certain structures that show the square structure that keeps turning in on itself incrementally, and displays like an oscillation. And bismuth is also an oscillator. If you look at the elements on the periodic table, as John Searle and John Searle's team has pointed out, that elements fall within quantum states of oscillators and rotors. The oscillating elements are elements 1, 3, lithium, 5, 7, 9, on up. They're the odd numbered elements. Rotors are element number 2, number 6, number 10, number 14, and then you get into combinations of rotor oscillators, which are elements 4, 8, 12, 16.
So Brett, if I might interject, so when I stated, for example, on Coast to Coast AM on November 11th of 2009, that the crystal array in the chronovisor was made of a crystalline bismuth structure, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't this something that was not only not in the public domain and not spoken of by conventional quantum physicists, but wasn't this something that was not even really at that time emergent in alternative time travel research and development of today?
No, it's not even recognized even now.
So again, this was something that I had learned from my dad when I was a child on the project. He said, we're driving an EM signal through an octagonal array of bismuth. But I want to actually ask, before I turn it over back to Scott as the host, I want to ask Brett one more question. When you drove up to Mount Shasta in that summer of 1980 and met my father and I, and of course your father, Tom Stillings, let me just ask you a few questions. Didn't I identify, for example, the hat and the glasses he was wearing?
Yeah.
The color of your van and so forth. Okay. When you were driving up there, didn't your father describe something about my past or future that involved time travel? Is that true?
Yes, he very specifically said when I was standing to the left of him, and you were in front, and he said that to your father that he is going to be the one that's going to start talking, and he laughed and he said a lot, and he's going to write about it, in fact, and I hadn't gotten to that part of knowing anything like about writing the book, and so my father was always kind of sarcastically saying something if he was trying to drive a point home. And your father responded in a kind of a safe, secure. He took like a safe, secure stance, and didn't just kind of gave a didn't say much after that. And there was a couple of things said and paused. Your father went to the car to go get something, and that's when my father ushered me over to hand him the material that I gave him.
So Andy's father gave a wink and a nod.
Mm. Yeah, here you have two kids from Southern California. There's this clandestine meeting set up by their fathers in the summer of 1980 in Mount Shasta. Brett has described how driving up there, his father said something to the effect of, you're going to be meeting a young man here who was involved in time travel research by the United States government. And then at the meeting, Brett, if I might describe this, because I remembered Brett. Brett called me in, I think, December of last year after hearing me on Coast to Coast AM in November. And I remembered them. I described how his father was wearing a hat, kind of like one of those Australian bush hats that's kind of bent over to the side. He had sunglasses on, but they were clip-ons over his prescription eyeglasses. And I mentioned how I described the unusual pumpkin-colored color of their automobile, of their van. But the really remarkable thing that I remembered about that camping trip was that Brett's father sent him back to the van to get a shoebox. Brett brought the shoebox over to our campsite, and they had a piece that was about the size of, about the size of a piece of bread, a slice of bread, of what his father described as boundary layer material. And he took the material, which is a sort of a slab of rock or a metallic kind of substance, and he placed it 3 feet above the campground, above the dirt of the campground, and it hovered. So apparently one of the scientific purposes of that arranged meeting was to introduce me and Brett, presumably, I don't know if he had seen it before, to boundary layer materials. In other words, this is a material where you have a complete proton shell, and the ground and the rock were mutually repelling each other, and our fathers were literally showing their progeny, the next generation, materials that can be used to create anti-gravitic craft. And this is 30 years ago.
Now, Brett, and you do you remember that?
Oh, I remember it wasn't quite the size of a piece of bread, and it was slightly curled up. It was kind of like a thick piece of or a piece of sheet metal type. Yeah, and it was but yeah, it was I'd played with that before, and that was only when my father was around. And there's a couple extra things to that, was that my father had pulled the car around, and he'd gotten in the van, in the back seat of the van, and was doing something. There's probably more to that. And but yeah, very clearly, I remember,
didn't witness,
I kind of trailed off at that point, but I saw it. It was actually about 2 or 3 inches above the ground. And but yeah, I specifically remember that.
And I remember Tom Stillings, Brett's father, urging me to look down, get down on the ground and look at the fact that it was hovering. And so, here you have his dad's working for Lockheed, my dad's at Parsons, involved in time travel.
And,
just Brett's testimony corroborates my claim that my father was involved in deeply black classified defense technical development. It establishes that he was in communication with somebody involved in clandestine research at another major defense contractor, Lockheed. Brett provides the testimony that his father stated that I had been involved previously in time travel. And here we both corroborate the fact that his father had a piece of material. I remembered it sort of more as a slab-like material, but that he had this piece of metal that was literally repelling gravity. And so I really thank Brett, for coming forward and essentially as a whistleblower and corroborating my account, because it took me 10 years to get to this point where I've had the opportunity to appear in the mass media, and individuals like Brett are now coming forward and corroborating different parts of my account. And I'm very grateful for that.
All right.
Wow,
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot. I actually have another question for you, Brett. Were you aware of your father's research and what he was involved in, or did he keep it pretty close to the chest?
Well, I knew that there was always, stuff I couldn't ask in front of company, like how would something like this work, or couldn't say this. And at school, young age, you can't say where Dad works. He's a mathematician. Was about all you could really say. He got into Lockheed Skunk Works. I can't remember what year it was, but he'd worked at JPL. He worked at Bendix first, and he worked at JPL, and then upgraded to Lockheed. And from what everyone tells me is that when you say Skunk Works, you're basically saying Area 51. And I've heard these stories about John Lear on the or not John Lear, but John Lear-like stories. That I heard one where someone had to wear goggles on the way out, and I do remember a very specific story where my dad was glad that he didn't have to wear those things anymore. And my dad had a really insecure thing about his eyes, and I think because he mentioned that he had to walk out of a building to another building, but he had to wear something, and he didn't like wearing it. And when I heard the goggle story, very much a similar story like that, it just completely pinged to me.
Right, you remember that. Well, I gotta thank you for coming on the show and backing up Andy's story. I'm sure that we'll be hearing more from you in the future in regards to Andy. Now, and thanks for your call. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I do have some more questions for Andy.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Andy?
Yes.
Well, that was amazing. Having somebody call in to back up your story while you're on the air. That's amazing.
Yes.
And you have other people that are backing you up, don't you?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I had an ethicist for the intelligence community, Jean Maria Rigo, provide me access to Captain Ernest Garcia. I think he's now Major Ernest Garcia, who confirmed that he remembered my father. He asked me, do you remember Connie Chavez? Because the project people were frequently dining at the restaurants where she worked in Albuquerque. And he remembered the project. Of course, he had worked as a guard on the Dead Sea Scroll expedition of the Israeli archaeologist Yigal Yadin in the 50s. And also, he was the whistleblower on the human rights abuses involving the Yanomamo Indian tribe in Central America, where the U.S. Defense Department was involving them in highly unethical experiments involving chemical and biological weapons. So he was very guarded, but he did confirm for me that Project Pegasus existed, that it involved T, as he said, time travel technologies. And he even remembered interviewing me at Camp Kilmer in New Brunswick, New Jersey, when I was a 5-year-old, just being brought into the project. So, but just by simply doing enough background investigation, I've had people like Gene and Brett contact me and share things from my past where I can go, oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, your dad was wearing that Breaker Morant hat. You had this pumpkin-colored van. He pulled this weird material out of a shoebox and showed how it was hovering, above the ground. So I've developed corroboration that way by simply talking enough about what happened to me so that people contact me. In some cases, I've been put in touch with, through academics, with people inside the military and intelligence community who have shared certain information with me. For example, early in my investigation, my name and my father's name were found in the entry logs for the Los Alamos National Labs and the Alamogordo Air Force Base. And when we asked CIA what they could provide about my father, the word that came back through our intermediary, that is to say me and the academic I was working through, who was liaising for me to ONI and to CIA, is we cannot provide any information to the immediate family members of living or deceased CIA personnel. When I contacted certain project principals like Dr. Harold Agnew, who was the administrator of the project, when I spoke with Joseph Conason, who was one of my father's colleagues from the Ralph M. Parsons Company, who was one of the electrical engineers on Project Pegasus, they provided information that established that the project existed and that it involved teleportation-based time travel and other forms of quantum access. When I told Joe Conason, for example, that I was going to be writing a book and trying to get a movie made, a feature film about my experiences, he said, and this is a direct quote, he said, a book, a movie, nobody on the outside knows about that stuff. When I first contacted Dr. Agnew in 2000, he said, no, look, Andy, you're mixed up here. You're mistaken. The teleportation project wasn't at Lano. Well, it wasn't. In New Mexico, it was based at Sandia.